Hello Fear fans, and welcome to Everything Fear, your one-stop shop for all things horror. I'm Kit Tinsley, I'm a horror author, film academic and general horror geek. Today I'm going to be giving you my list of my top 10 slasher movie villains. Now this isn't the movies, this is the villains themselves. I have to explain this because there are certain movies that I would place higher if it was a list of the movies that are great movies with not so great villains. And likewise, there are some great slasher villains who are in some pretty bad movies. Number 10, Harry Warden, My Bloody Valentine. 1 year after being the only survivor of a gas explosion in a mine, Harry Warden took revenge on the supervisors who had abandoned their posts to attend a Valentine's Day party. The town vows to never celebrate the holiday again. However, 20 years later, a group of young adults decide they want to throw a Valentine's Day party. When the town makes them cancel, for fear of angering Harry Warden, the young adults decide to move the party to the mine itself, the very scene of the tragedy. Harry returns and a bloodbath ensues. With his miner's helmet and his respirator, Harry is a very sinister looking slasher villain. He's really creepy. And his weapon of choice, the pickaxe, makes for some really great kills. Number 9, Cropsey, The Burning. This is where the fact that this is a list of the villains and not the movies comes into play for the first time. The Burning is actually one of my favourite slasher movies of the 1980s. And if this were a list of slasher movies, then this would definitely be in the top 3 for me. Because for me, it is by far the best of the summer camp horror movies. I know that's controversial, but it's true. As a villain though, Cropsey isn't really that interesting. He's a fairly generic campfire monster, and his shears, though effective, are hardly the coolest weapon that a slasher has ever wielded on film. Number 8, The Killer, Profondo Rosso, Deep Red. The killers in giallo movies tend to follow the same aesthetic. The long coat, the gloves, the hat. So even though I've used Deep Red, or Profondo Rosso to give it its Italian title, this could actually apply to many films. The name giallo means yellow in Italian and comes from the popular pulp crime novels that were printed on yellow paper and with yellow covers. They're essentially ultra-violent and stylised crime thrillers, a kind of blood-drenched Euro-noir. The look of the killer with the long coat and the wide-brimmed hat fits in really nicely with this sort of noir origin. Unlike some of the killers on this list, the killer in Deep Red and other giallos is not some mindless brute. They tend to be shrewd and calculating murderers who remain one step ahead of the main characters and the authorities. Number 7, Leatherface. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise has been a wild ride, let's face it. It was a long time, 12 years, between the first and second movie in the series. Then there were a few rushed sequels, then a remake, then a prequel to the remake, then a reboot sequel, the discarded part 2, then a prequel to the original, and soon we are getting another reboot sequel that is disregarding everything from part 2 onwards, including the previous movie that did exactly the same thing. The timeline has basically become so convoluted that it's hard to know where any of the movies sit. However, there has been one constant throughout the series: Leatherface. From his origins as the clumsy, lumbering brute of the original to the fiercer and more efficient version that we got in the remakes, he has always been there. With his trusty chainsaw, his blood-drenched apron, and his mask made of human flesh, he has been a terrifying movie monster and a figure of fun and pity, and everything in between. Number 6, Ghostface. Wes Craven's postmodern horror masterpiece, Scream, relaunched the flagging slasher genre in the mid-90s. Craven took the style and the rules of the original slasher movies and wrapped them up in this wonderful self-referential bow, all while adding a dash of the giallo whodunit into the mix. The film was a huge success that spawned a franchise that's very soon about to release its 5th instalment, as well as several TV shows. The killer in this franchise is interesting in that it is a different person or people in each movie, all choosing to wear the same disguise. There is something genuinely creepy about this hooded figure with his frayed robes and that elongated white face and that knife that glints in the moonlight. Number 5, Candyman. Bernard Rose's adaptation of Clive Barker's short story The Forbidden was renamed Candyman for the big screen. The action was moved from the council estates of Liverpool to the projects of Chicago, specifically Cabrini Green. And from this, one of the best horror movies of the 1990s was born. The whole film has this unnerving dreamlike quality that stays with you after you've watched it like a half-remembered nightmare. With outstanding performances from Virginia Madsen and Tony Todd, Candyman remains a masterpiece of cinematic horror to this day. With his hook, the bees, his powers, and that voice, Candyman is a truly terrifying slasher villain. Number 4, Norman Bates. Though Psycho wasn't technically a slasher movie, it was certainly a huge inspiration for the subgenre that was about to be born. And in its later sequels, brought out in the 1980s, it definitely headed into the slasher movie arena. Norman Bates is the proto-slasher villain. He is the creepy granddaddy of them all. Played throughout the original series by the amazing Anthony Perkins, he was so shy and gentle that it really was genuinely shocking when you found out he was this deranged killer. The really creepy thing about Psycho is it shows that monsters don't always look like monsters. This is the way in the real world, and seeing it on film gives Norman a very plausible feel. Number 3, Jason Voorhees. I'm going to go on record here and say that I am not a fan of the Friday the 13th movies. I know to some that might sound like sacrilege, but I'm not. The first one was good. The second one is actually probably my favourite of them all, as it has a really cool, sleazy hillbilly horror feel to it. I also enjoy Jason Goes to Hell and Jason X, as they were trying to do something different with the franchise. However, for me, everything between part 2 and part 9, I find them incredibly repetitive, predictable, and if I'm honest, dull. However, that's not to say I'm not a fan of Jason. He is an absolutely iconic character, and when used well, he is a very effective slasher villain, a seemingly unstoppable force for destruction. Though it's the ice hockey mask that is the iconic look for the character, I still really like the sack mask from part 2. There's just something genuinely creepy about that look. So many great kills and effects throughout the franchise, and such an iconic villain, he had to be in the top 3 slasher movie villains of all time, even if personally I find a lot of the films that he's in to be meh at best. Number 2, Michael Myers. Though John Carpenter didn't create the slasher subgenre with Halloween, he certainly popularised it and began to create a lot of its rules. Again, like with Friday the 13th, I'm not a fan of all of the Halloween movies. However, many of them are great. Michael, though, is an absolutely genius character. He seems to exist only to kill. He's like a force of nature. His expressionless white mask, those black eyes, his stillness and the determination of his movements really do give him the sense of being a shark. Carpenter is a master of suspense, and he turns what could have been a very generic horror movie into a masterpiece of fear and tension. If you enjoy this video, if you could give us a like, subscribe, and maybe tickle that bell icon to be notified when we upload future content, that would be great, thank you. Number 1, Freddy Krueger. It'll probably come as no surprise to any of my regular viewers that I've put Freddy Krueger at number 1. I've stated on many occasions that A Nightmare on Elm Street is my favourite horror movie of all time. This is in large part down to Freddy Krueger. He was, at the time of his creation, something completely different for the subgenre. Whereas so many of the killers in slasher movies are these silent, faceless, lumbering killers, Freddy had a personality, though it was taken to comedic extremes as the series went on. There was always a sadistic humour to Freddy, even in the first movie, though it was buried deep within a seething mass of burning hatred. Slasher killers tend to use knives rather than guns, hence why they're called slashers, not shooters, because killing with a knife is more personal. Freddy takes this to the extreme. His famous glove makes the knives a part of his body, an extension of him. And let's not forget, Freddy stalks his victims in their dreams. That is a genuinely creepy idea. Everyone has to sleep. Eventually, Freddy will get you. Well, that was my list of my personal top 10 slasher movie villains of all time. Now, I know a lot of you are going to disagree with this, so let me know your favourites down in the comments below. And until next time, stay scared and stay tuned.